The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ruben Rahming.
Thank you, Madam President, and a happy Mother's Day related to you and all the mothers in this honorable house. And to my queens, my wife Natasha Rahming, and my mom, Evangeline Betsy Butler Rahming, and also to all my aunts on both sides of my biological flood, and to all mothers, a special blessing on you, and we appreciate you for what you have done and what you do. Madam President, I think this is a very interesting time for us in the country, but I think I'll take a moment, first of all, before I get to the resolution, to address the comment that was made by Senator Pickstock, which basically attribute to the former administration handling during COVID a state of what he called a police state and everything else that he would normally do in terms of his negative imputations. I remember when we met at the opening of Bahama Water Park. Senator Darren was there, a few other persons was there. We was waiting for somebody at the then opposition. And he said something that stuck in my mind. That I reminded him about something that was factual as related to the COVID. He smiled at me and he said, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good lie." You know who that is? No, I'm quoting what he said. You can't tell me what I said. I'm quoting it. I just looked at Darren. I'm quoting the person who said it. And I'll tell you who said it if need be. And from then, that gave me a unique perspective on him. Let's look at the unvarnished truth. We had police and defense force out ensuring the enforcement of the laws that was necessary for the safety of our people, because we ourselves know our people very, very well. And to follow the necessary rules that was passed in the House at that time. I remember how many times I saw videos came out from persons who, after they would have gotten the COVID, had videos saying, "Wow, COVID is real." I remember seeing people who we love, like Sawyer Boy, was on the edge of life, and many other persons in the media as it relate to that. I remember the thousands of persons who would have died, those who recovered, and many of them even like my cousin, who is still debilitated after recovering from COVID in and of itself. If anyone imply that in the heat of the movement, and seeing people dropping down like flies and being at risk, and seeing the reckless behaviors of people like a club when they open the door, you saw an image of clowns in a car and they keep coming out. A club the size of a matchbox seemed to have must be about 200 people in it, and they just keep flooding out. No one had masks. At that time, it's something new. We had to protect people from themselves, whether we like it or not, like a parent have to do for their child. But what they also didn't state, the truth of the matter is that there has been circulating recommendations for years, I may say decades, that the civil service was bloated and that we need to right-size the civil service, and that would have been one of the major ways government can balance and save monies. At a time of COVID and the shutdown, that would have been the perfect opportunity to make that kind of decision. The country is at a state whereas 70% of our revenue had actually stopped instantaneously. And not because of us, because the world around us stopped travel. Period. The world around us stopped travel. Yet, in the midst of that, the same administration then led by Hubert Minnis made a calculated decision that all the persons in the civil service will not lose a dime or reduction of their funds even though they were home. That's not a law. That was a character policy decision to ensure that there is a sense of normalcy even in the midst of our catastrophe. He went further on in NIB, which by law there is an entitlement to unemployment benefit. But when that would have been used up and there was no longer an entitlement to the Bahamian people to claim unemployment benefit through national insurance, the same Hubert Minnis made a calculated decision which was passionate, which was not required by law, at a time when the government had no revenue coming in, to quadruple the payments of unemployment benefit to Bahamians indiscriminately. So in other words, they got not one installment, not two installments, but I think they got maybe up to 5 installments of injections of unemployment benefit. Then there were to the taxi drivers and a lot of other persons that fell through the loop. He made special arrangements that even though they weren't entitled at all, that they would receive, the straw vendors, the taxi drivers, et cetera, et cetera. Then the calculated decision that had to be from the heart, because it had never been done before, and nobody probably thought about it. 2 things was done even for the private sector, nay, 4. One was the suspension of the labor law. Some persons walked and picketed the bridge and pushed because in their situation they wanted to just resign and get whatever compensation they could have had. But the intention was to keep your status protected. So when we come out of this COVID situation, when you went back to the job, you still had your 10-year tenure or your 30-year tenure and all that was due to you, instead of losing it because of the time and the necessity and the discomfort that we all felt. Not only that, the government made a decision, a calculated decision, which is historic, and I've never heard anyone complain about it, and I've heard few persons on the opposite side even acknowledge it, to instruct these companies, these hotels and these private companies, that the VAT money you have owed to us, we allow you to convert that into salaries. I think it was up to $500 to pay your employees. So many persons who are in these private jobs were being played again by the government through tax receipts that would not have yet been turned in. To save people. Task force that involve many people, many NGOs, so much so that if you throw a rock in there, you may hit any particular person that has served this country throughout. A lot of things, I can say that the tailor that just came here, Madam President, to measure me for a blazer for the Independence celebration is a PLP person. I get a problem with that. You see, so let's not do this. I'm talking. This is the upper house. So let's. I'm looking at the president. Let's stay focused. What I'm simply saying is, we can lob all we want, but the proof is still in the pudding, because if the government was in such a shambles, if the state was in such a shambles even during COVID, there would have not been any possibility of a surplus in government revenue in the first quarter after the elections, which was attributed to holding the reins and keeping the government prepared for its rebounds. So in any event, the reason why we are here is because decisions that would have been made. But to this bill, or to this resolution, Madam President, I look at it and it caused some concerns to me, nay, some questions, in that there will be now a parliamentary committee made of the elected and also the appointed persons in the Senate with certain powers to make the inquiries and to also investigate and also to be able to make recommendations. I have to ask, and also in the interest of the public, for us to look and appreciate how important this is, and to hope that this does not end up being some of the traditional parliamentary committees that just silently drift away. When I look at this and I see to assist and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, this raised so many concerns within my mind. It caused me to have to ask and to hope that this committee would be able to finally begin to investigate the sexualization of our children. Will this committee do that? From the time of Cynthia Mother Pratt, when she's Minister of National Security, I raised that time because it was during that time that she submitted a report, and she also stated how our children was very sexualized in our school, even down to as low as the primary school. And I've yet to see the level of movement. It has always concerned me, Madam President, that when we drive down Christie Street, we sometimes see young ladies in blue and white, and they're pregnant, and many of them are teenage women who are pregnant. Unless it's for a pair within their same age set, we need to ask ourselves how many of those are due to what we call statutory rape. Or are we just simply comfortable in seeing the young lady pregnant and tease her and whatever else, and not to find out if this was some strapping old man who would have been taking advantage of our children? I agree with Senator when he said rape is rape. And if we sexualize our children too early, they run a stronger and greater risk of abuse. Will this committee unbiasedly begin to investigate matters such as these, and matters such as sexual grooming of our children, even our boys, more so our boys? The level of same-sex interest in our school has been proliferated, and there have been, and I notice, powerful people and people of all spectrum who have been sexualizing and grooming boys. Some of them are so wise that they will groom the boy, and just when they become 18, they do the deed. But they've been prepping this boy from 14, 15, 16. I know this for a fact. Will this committee take a view that they will stand against such things and include this in their recommendations and in their follow-up, because there's a lot of work in this regard? Will this committee also ensure that the process, even with the matter of rape, will be swiftly investigated, especially in light of the evidentiary timeline? If some rape matters are reported a little late, sometimes it could be even years. But sometimes they're reported very, very early. And we need to ensure that all the proper preservation of evidence and all those things and those matters are properly upheld. As it relates to human rights, there were a number of articles that I would speak to, and I would actually even challenge our country to see how serious we are. In the Constitution of this body, identified here in this resolution. Some of the articles as relate to human rights from the UN speaks to a number of things. Article 1 is all Bahamians are born free and equal in dignity and in rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience, such and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. In Article 2, there was something that sort of stand out to me when it said everyone is entitled to the rights and the freedom set forth in the Declaration without discrimination of any kinds, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, politics, or other options, national and social origins, property, birth, and other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of political, judicial, and international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other sovereignty. I say that because there have been times, Madam President, and you may have seen it, the way crimes and offenses is handled related to tourists seem to be a bit more preferential to a Bahamian who is doing the same crime. Sometimes I get concerned that sometimes we advocate our sovereign responsibility to ensure that justice is to be had here, that we allow a person to be deported and dealt with in another jurisdiction. And I feel as if that is us shirking our personal duty to it. I feel we should be just like we are with the FTX matter, ensuring that we express ourselves on this line and not abandoning it to the foreign guys as if Bahamians weren't hurt. I express the same matter as with CLECO. We put a liquidator in place quickly to protect Bahamian interests, though there are many claimants, but we're going to look out for Bahamian first. Exactly. I would like to see that whole process done within the law, especially as it relates to human rights, because we've had massive breaches of human rights, particularly against women in this country, on massive levels that has been evidently shown to be known by people high up and all throughout the spectrum. That situation is exemplified in the NIGAD situation, where the abuses of Bahamian women and even human trafficking, moving them cross-border, et cetera, and our Bahamian girls, et cetera. And even though he is going through his processes in foreign jurisdictions, I am wondering, because I hadn't heard of, and if it hadn't been done, I am demanding that we actually have our own inquiry so our women and our people know that regardless, we're going to throw our blow even if we don't win the war. I don't consider it satisfactory for him just to suffer or be convicted in a foreign jurisdiction when such a large amount of heinous crimes are done here. He should probably even be trialed in absentia. Because it's the job of the protectorate, the government, the legislative, the executive, to ensure that Bahamian people's rights are protected. And if there is one Bahamian girl involved in that debacle, we should be standing on the side of truth once it is established and to defend that right of Bahamians. We also, in human rights, need to ensure that it's not just the victim, but those who are part of the conspiracy, those who sat tacitly by. Like the story of the Good Samaritan, walked on the other side of the road because you're getting money so you can play like, I see nothing, I hear nothing. Who would have been there and witnessed those incidences? Some people in law enforcement positions. So if we're talking about human rights and fairness, we gotta appreciate that fairness is a double-edged sword. And anyone, government or opposition, must appreciate, tolerate, and support when the sword cut towards them and the sword cut the other way. Because in the middle is the rights of the masses who elects us, who we have to appreciate and to protect. Article 3 says everyone have a right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 5 says no one shall be subject to torture, cruelty, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Will this committee investigate police brutality? Will this committee investigate our nursing homes where where our elderly have been suffering in many instances. Maybe not by the patron who owned the place, but sometimes by an individual. We have heard of these things. What about the home of our children? The children that are wards of the state. We just saw what happened recently with the abuse of children that came forth. What about abuse from bosses who use their power, the purse, to abuse workers, withhold money, and in cases where there are foreign workers working here, or in the case of where there have been wealthy expats who hire Bahamians. I've heard about it many times, especially on flung islands and different places. Treat them like dirt. Who's going to come to their rescue? Will this committee be one in their hearing, call hearing, so people could speak their truth and fairly investigate it and call it? I've heard about these bosses bringing in expats and bringing in workers and holding their travel document. Is that not a kind of entrapment? You see what I'm saying? So you can't go nowhere, I get your travel documents and dude, will we stand up for them? I'm talking about blatantly stand up if we're going to get to the point of this resolution. Will that body echo or refrain around the country?
Can I help?
Yes, you can.
Just to help on this issue. Just to help on this issue.
The chair recognizes Senator
Thank
the
you.
Honorable Ryan Pinder.
So if I'm an employer and I hold your passport or otherwise a travel document that you're working for me, that is a violation of the law of the Bahamas as a trafficking in persons violation, punishable by severe penalties in this country. And I encourage any such person who is here and under that circumstance to file a complaint with the police, because the Department of Public Prosecutions will take that with the utmost seriousness and prosecute, right? But in order to do that, there has to be a complaint made so we can further investigate and prosecute. So you're right, it is a blatant human rights violation.
Yes.
A blatant human rights violation. It's a criminal act.
Yes.
And those who are aggrieved in that situation should pursue a complaint with the police so we can take the prosecution to the end and abolish that practice. Thank you.
I thank the Attorney General and for acknowledging. I know it is wrong, but I've yet to hear, and I'm not saying it had not happened, I am not knowledgeable of any, if not much, of such prosecutions, but the persecution connected to the act exists because you hear it a lot of times. And so a committee that's established to hear these things, as I said before, must enunciate and say this to give peace to the people so the people will know that there is redress, and they must stand up and personally affirm that they be fair and unbiased in the execution of their duty and their due diligence to ensure that regardless of whomever you are, that justice would be had. These things are wrong, and these have been cancers in our society for a very, very long time. And if this is what it is, a select committee that has to report every 6 months, then that should be at least biannually. We should have a list of growing complaints and reports that highlight what is happening, and we should see a higher level of prosecution in these matters. This is what human rights is all about. Under Article 7 it says, all are equal before the law and entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration, and against any incitement of such discrimination. You'll notice why in my last debate, notwithstanding what was in the air as related to rape matters, I was very, very cautious because it is not my place to impute on anyone, despite my feelings, whether they're innocent or guilty, and to ensure that my language does not infringe upon their right to defense, because we want the law to ensure, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the guilt, and then proceed forward. But here it is now. I smiled because in light of that, and me speaking, and I do stand by the fact that the statement made that she withdraw the case, the person should apologize. In light of that,
Madam President.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable
Madam
Darren.
President, I stand
Darren
to
picked up.
caution the member.
What is your point of intervention, please?
I stand to caution the member with respect to what he's alluding to, which is a matter that's before the court.
So,
Thank
I
you,
rest.
Senator Bixar.
I know,
Thank you,
he
Senator
didn't get a
Bixar.
chance. Madam President, no charges. As you would have seen, my diligence even now, and the clear fact that the attorney at law that just spoke know that charges have not been filed, unless I missed something. And I am still not trying to impute anyone, but the mere fact, because that cut personally, and I think that's something I would never want to do. And if I would have done it, I would apologize, because it implied something that should have been better understood not to even go there. I could even say, you can speak for the person you would have spoken to, but you can't speak to, because it is human rights, and exactly as related as to their entitlement, every which way of their entitlement before the law. And the entitlement, I just read it to the man, and the man can't understand it. And yet he stands up in this Senate, as he did in the last sitting by the president, and tried to imply, no, basically said that the opposition don't study and don't come prepared to give a basic debate. I read the article clearly right here before him to his face, that no one should actually be finding themselves to the point where it's a violation, their discrimination as to relate to the overall policy, or you should not have persons putting things out there, which I agree, as Senator Pistock said earlier, we should not be personally attacking people and their families and pulling those things in. These are things I learned from written law. These things I learned from character, from my grandparents, my parents, and being around the church, and most importantly, do to others what you expect to do to you. You know, if there's something that did aggrieve me, Madam President, because it did, there is a matter before the court. But yet I saw persons from the opposition engaging the plaintiff, coming out there and asking him about matters of accusations of assault and putting it in his face. That's something any side should not do. I will not be publicly chanting against the persons who was recently being investigated for rape. I would not do that. I would not encourage that. I don't rule a party, but I would not encourage that. And I would stand up publicly and say now that is improper. But I wonder if the opposite would say the same thing about their man, putting it in front of a man who's going before the court and asking him about abuse allegations and did you do that? And clearly they got people in their own camp who was at the preliminary stage of that. This is the kind of stuff that none of us as mature politicians or even behemoths should be encouraging. And we should repudiate it if we can't do it collectively on an individual level, say, as for me and my house, I do not encourage that kind of thing. Because I will not encourage that kind of thing. That is wrong.
On a point of order.
What is your, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder. What is your point of order?
The honorable member, it took me a while to get that word out after this diatribe that I've just heard, should be cautioned, and I ask him to withdraw any half-based allegation about persons on this side without demonstrating proof that he can table on, no, you gotta demonstrate proof, because you know what? It's not opinion, because he made an allegation, which is an allegation of fact, and it's an allegation of law, and he has to table it. I can bring the criminal complaint and the charge sheet filed against them from that other side and table them in this place of 56 counts of fraud. I can do that. He can't do that with anybody on our side, and I ask him to withdraw it.
Absolutely.
The thing, Madam.
Senator Rahming. Senator Rahming, with respect to the inferences that you made with the member, can you repeat what you said, please?
My position was that there are persons associated with the other side. And you notice I said, even though we can't speak for others, we speak for ourselves. Because you can't always control everybody else. But when you do see somebody you know, say, bro, that ain't right. All right? We didn't make mention of any individual at all, but we spoke to a matter that is in the public domain. I'm prepared to present the record if the House is sufficient enough that the President will be willing to view videos and see it. And I think in a matter, and this is what grew me, in a matter that involves, especially, Madam President, a woman expressing assault. All right? This is how I look at it, Madam President. It is egregious to be assaulting women, and I personally am against that. But as a man, I'm also personally afraid of what I've also seen, false accusations that will ruin a man for the rest of his life. That is why, regardless of how I may strongly feel for one, I try to stay right there and say, let the law have its way. And all I was encouraging, what I know, and I can show it, no, it's not hypocrisy, is I challenge you and I encourage you, table it. If it's the truth, table it. What you hiding it for?
Public domain.
No, you said you want to table it, then just table it.
The public domain.
Madam President, like he said, he wants to table it. He said that. I don't have a problem with that. See, the problem with us is we want truth our way. You know, if the matter is truth, the truth is indefensible, table it. I have no objections to that. I don't care who it is, Prime Minister or janitor.
Senator Darren Pickstock,
Madam President,
what is your intervention?
my intervention is simply, I stand on a point of relevance. This member has a peculiar misunderstanding of human rights. I stand on a point of relevance.
Thank you, Senator Pickstock. Thank you. Senator Rahming. Senator Rahming, can you please proceed with your contribution?
Yeah, it's rather insulting that, Madam President, that those who are trained in the bar don't understand humanity. And I can show them the human rights as I would have expressed it. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against discrimination in violation of the Declaration and against any incrimination to such discrimination. That's what's happening here. This is the same human rights list that this resolution supports. And the lawyers here, by their offense, and despite me walking a responsible line, seem to be offended by the fact that even anyone who is accused in the law is innocent until proven guilty. My mom is a fighter. My mom is a fighter. We live over St. Augustine's. My mom is a fighter. And yeah, and I speak about my mom, so show some respect. All right? No, when I speak about women. My mom is a fighter, and we live to the bottom of Sack Hill.
Order, please.
And my mom used to walk, exercising, go over the hill and walk to the back of St. Augustine's. And one day, in the back of St. Augustine's, my mom had a fight for her life. And she's walking down Freeway, someone came between the school buildings and attacked her. That's why when the people look and see my mom and say, she's pretty, I say, boy, that's Rambo, don't worry about that. My mom fought for her life, came home with broken nails, pulled backward, had a broken neck, fought up a man even with a broken neck bone had to be replaced. You won't see that today because she ain't limping. I say, boy, mom, they don't build them like you no more. I have family members close to me who have been through these kind of situations, and it's against my character. Even if that person was caught, because we ran after taking care of a stray to try to see, and we didn't find the person, that person still have a right to justice. To justice. And no one who is a lawmaker should have even the shadow of contempt against that. Not a shadow. And to do that shows a serious flaw in character. You don't need to be a lawmaker. You could go on the streets and say whatever you want, but we have a higher order because the laws that are being executed have been passed in these assemblies. I'll read number 9. Maybe some of us need to come down to earth and live in the bushes with people to remember that we all are one. The title don't make you better than nobody. There are elderly persons who have never been to school will blow the PhD out with wisdom. Article number 9. No one should be subject to arbitrary arrest and detention or exile. So that means coming up to this Junkanoo parade, the common practice of rounding up deviants and putting them in jail so they can miss the parade in a way to help with security, which I know and I could appreciate, but is that right? I would hope they don't come because I appreciate the police know that these people are problematic people. And they're doing it to protect. But guess what? Even in your most sincere effort, you still can't come and ride the law or human rights. See, that's the problem when you are a lawgiver, you know. God cared that none should be perished. God is the greatest one. He is love. But if you don't go to hell, God got to obey the law. That's where you won't go. That's your choice. So come in Junkanoo and other times when they do these roundup of these boys, are those things going to be investigated? Or sometimes even the strategic practice of catch them on the weekend so you can hold them, over. Are they going to address that? So there are ways in which probably even the weekend, if they are now, you could educate me, Mr. Attorney General, where persons could actually go through their processes without having to stay in until Monday. You see what I'm saying? But they hold and they do it's a practice though. The same way I gave the example of bosses holding passports and everything else. I know what's in the law. But the fact is, it's not happening. The thing with human rights is, it ain't just about what's in the law. The purpose of this body is to ensure that the law is being enforced and executed equitably. That's what it is. So it ain't good enough to say, it's rapists in the law. But we still have a duty of care to ensure that these things are properly done. People are protected. People feel safe. They don't feel incriminated. I think we now have witness protection. All those things. So regardless, it cannot be sufficiently so that we can just say, okay, it's there, so that's just the end of that. We need to ensure that there is enforcement. In Article 11.2, it says, no one shall be held guilty of a penalty of a penal offense on account of an act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it was created, nor shall it be heavier. That's an example of a human right, which means that if a law is breached at this time, you can't delay my punishment under that law, and it may be the law, but people still do it, so you can pass something to change the offense that I was qualified at that time. Because we've seen some cases where laws, I've seen that in the United States recently, have been amended, and special dispensation has been allowed just so people could go ahead and reach back and grab something which would have ordinarily been barred by the statute. Article 12, I'm skipping through this. No one should be subject to arbitrary interference with their privacy, their family, their home, or correspondence, not to attack upon his honor, reputation. Everyone has a right to the protection of the law against such interferences or attack. And it spoke right back to what I'm simply saying. God forbid at that time when somebody is fighting for their life, I want them to be able to focus on their trial. I said in the last setting, I hold no brief I gave the example of Samuel Knighty Knowles. He's a drug dealer. You kill people, children, and all that stuff. The drugs that you deal kills children and destabilizes our society. But when you had one more action before the court, you should have had a right to hear that action, and I would have been the one right there hoping it failed too, and then be extradited. All I'm simply saying is law. I mean, how hard is that? The laws were passed here, and people are entitled to the full extent and benefit of the law. Article 15, everyone has a right to a nationality. Why stop on that one? We've been debating all this stuff for years, and we hear everybody use the excuses about, let's use particularly the Haitian immigration problem. And we've been hearing people saying that, oh, they're stateless and all kind of different stuff. Human rights say everybody has a right to a nationality under law. Categorically, there's not a single Bahamian, not a single Haitian that doesn't have a nationality. You are born Haitian under the Constitution. Wherever you are in the world, you're born Haitian. So in that human rights struggle, I want us to appreciate in the nuance that when dealing with this sensitive matter as related to immigration and everything else, we must realize that maybe they're seeking asylum, but they're not stateless. Now, if you've never been to your state, that doesn't change the fact. You're still born Haitian. I want to look at one or two, and I just want us to appreciate some of the things that this body will have to deal with. Let me show you another one that interests me. Article 17.2. No one should be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Everyone has the right to own property, that's one, alone, as well as in association with others. And then two was no one should be deprived of their property. The Attorney General just earlier in January, there was a special injection of capital of $17 million to settle matters before the court, or to settle matters related to the government. Which is in the breath of fresh air because, government has been lousy and one of the greatest offenders to his own Bahamian people in terms of settling matters. I said governments has been. And if you remember my speech, you didn't have to emphasize it when I said it first. You think I changed my mind? I didn't change my mind. My point is human rights. I just read, see, that's what's so idiotic sometimes about the cheerleaders in the background. I have the answer because just so that the people can realize that someone who is a barrister is ignoring the very direct reading of an article of human rights law. See, his statement brings up the concern to why I have to be concerned about this body. Because if the body has been constituted by certain people such as the one here, woe is anybody. Because you're not going to respect even the darn human rights laws that is clearly articulated here for the benefit of anybody except your own personal ambition. That's why this heckling is foolish games. The reason why I asked this, Madam President, through you to the Attorney General, is because it is a human right that it shouldn't be deprived of arbitrarily of their land. And one of the things I raised then, I raise again now. Eminent domain. How many more, and it don't have to be a number, it could be much, few, medium or a great amount, of people who have had their land confiscated for highways and roads and airports. Have they been dealt yet? That's a human right. Yeah, you see, because, one second, just one quick second. Because, as stated by the Attorney General, and we agree, that has been happening too long in this country. And in some instances, families have died off, waiting for settlement, and that is a right by, and the human right, and committees such as this should help to also track down, you gotta file your complaint when you know, make it known that we're looking into these, so that anyone who slipped through the crack, come and get justice. I yield to the Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder.
Okay, thank you. I want to just say two things on that. The first one is he's absolutely right. When your property is taken from you, constitutionally you are entitled to be remunerated. Now, with respect to the $17 million that was part of the supplemental budget, that at the time I said was for the extinguishing of civil claims not property acquisition matters. So at that time, that was the allocation of the 17 million. Having said that, we have gone through an exercise between the Office of the Attorney General and the Office of the Prime Minister, because these lie in two different ministries, on what the proper allocation and listing of property acquisition outstanding matters are. Because you are absolutely correct. The government is obligated to remunerate those, and the government should not just kick the can proverbially down the road.
It has been.
We have had a meeting with the financial secretary on this specific issue recently.
Yes.
We have compiled a list of what we currently know about, and we're still pulling that together. It is a significant amount of money,
Yes.
much more than the special allocation I speak about.
And it's growing.
And it's growing. And we look to be in a position, one, well, maybe I should save it for the budget, but I'll help you out here. One, be in a position this year to make a material payment against those property acquisition matters. And two, going into the next fiscal year, have a definitive plan on how we will finally pay down these matters, so we will stop withholding monies that are properly allocated and due the Bahamian people. So in that vein, we are working on that. You have brought that up, I think, 2 or 3 times at least in this honorable place. Your voice was heard loud and clear, as it always is, and we are working to rectify that situation.
Attorney General, I thank you. I thank you for that, because I thank you for that because it has been done for too long, and it's a crime of governance, and I'm talking continuous governance against your own people, for God's sake. And we've seen the problems that it had throughout the country. And what I would do, as usual, within a reasonable time, I would engage the question again, just for the side of progress during the budget. You see? And again, these are human rights money. And that's all it is to it. I will stop at this point, and on this point, before I just give my closing concern. Article 26 says everyone has a right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. And then they spoke to technical and professional education, and we've seen the advancement that governments have been doing with BTVI. But we saw a stronger grasp on this under the former administration, where it made preschool education free and done all that it can to ensure that our preschoolers get their education. We found, as anyone would know in the educational arena, training and teaching, that it's the gaps within those first 5, 6 years that cause the unsurmountable difficulties that we face in people trying to catch up. In a child's adolescent development, the first 5 years of that child's life really locks in that child's identity, and the rest is a struggle. So to get them into the educational domain without any excuse because it is free is a great step forward to restoring and developing our nations and the value, our true asset, which is the Bahamian people. I'd like to raise, in my closing, a matter out of our former, the last debate on the central bank amendment, as a question, because it was stated over and repeatedly that the amendment and the allocation of the monies was not a government loan. A loan to the government. It's been repeated over and over vehemently. I want to ask a question, and it could be answered. The central bank had actually presented its annual report, and it was delivered to the Prime Minister on the 8th of May. In that annual report, you see that on 2 of the pages, page 88, says that in December 22nd, the central bank loaned the government of of the Bahamas, of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, 232 million and change. You don't need to know the exact amount. For the conversion into SDR, it stated that it loaned. Further in that document, it also stated here in the cash flow from investing activities, it says SDR loaned the government, again, the $32,972,614. Now, we all serve in honorable houses. Our central bank is a critical foundation to our country. It should always be non-political, and we trust our persons to be there. We commend the central bank for all of its groundbreaking moves and first in the world in terms of the release of a digital currency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, state-run digital currency. But I would like for Minister Alcides to let me know if he still stands in the light of the central bank report that the matter was not a loan, and if not, how do we clarify this, because either the central bank governor, John R. Roll, who signed off on the document, is actually wrong, or the government would have misspoke and need to re-look at this matter again. And I'm asking, as Solomon spoke to the two women, whose baby this is? Because it's either left or right. Do we cast doubt on the central bank report, or do we acknowledge the human error in the government that just steamrolled into something that should have just been called a misspeak? I rest on that, and I wait to respond from the AG or the Minister for Finance. Thank you, Madam President. I rest.